Today, we're going to talk about how to stop overthinking. The biggest problem with overthinking isn't simply that we do it. It's that despite thinking about things over and over and over again, it doesn't actually help us solve our problems. In fact, if you really pay attention, the more you overthink, the more you actually end up screwing up. And chances are, if you overthink and it still causes you problems, you've actually been scammed. And you may wonder, scammed by who? It turns out, scammed by all of society. So in society, we have this belief that IQ or thinking leads to success. We're taught this kind of story that the smarter you are, if you're in gifted and talented classes, you're in honors classes or whatever, if your IQ is high and you're good at thinking, you will be successful. In fact, we actually assume that thinking leads to improvements in performance. But if you actually look at the data, sometimes thinking actually makes things harder for us and leads to decreases in performance. Hey, just a quick note. A lot of people will ask us, what do I do next? And that's why we built Dr. K's Guide. It's a comprehensive resource that distills over 20 years of my experience, both as a monk and as a psychiatrist. And it's designed in a way that's tailored to fit your needs. So if you're interested in better understanding your mind and taking control of your life, check out the link below. So this is the core scam of overthinking, that we've been taught that thinking is actually a solution to a problem, which is why we keep doing it, right? We think, okay, if I can think my way, if I can think about it again and again and again, eventually I will figure out a solution. But we don't really realize that if you really look at the data, thinking is not actually the best way to get to a solution. And in fact, thinking can actually be a problem in and of itself, which is precisely why, despite all this overthinking, we still screw up. So the first data that we're going to look at actually comes from Mensa. So Mensa is an organization of worldwide geniuses. In order to join Mensa, you have to have an IQ in the top 2% of the population. So you got to be super, super smart. It turns out that if you look at the actual income of Mensa earners, things seem to get a little bit tricky. So the top 0.5% of earners in Mensa, this means the richest people in Mensa, have a median income of $250,000 a year or more. If you look at the top 0.5% of earners in the United States, who aren't necessarily geniuses, their income is about $2 million a year or more. So this is kind of shocking because we're talking about the 0.5% of the best earners of the smartest people in the world, and they make $250K a year. And you're looking at the 0.5% of best earners in the general US population, and they're making millions of dollars a year. And so this is kind of confusing, right? Because I thought IQ and the ability of thought led to success. And it turns out that that's simply not true. We can also see this in communities where people theory craft their way to conclusions. And a ridiculous place that you kind of see this is if you ever go to 4chan and you listen to what they say about relationships and sex, you'll discover that they have thought themselves into all kinds of idiocy. So my favorite example of this is I was reading 4chan one day because God knows why. And what I've sort of discovered is that there's a community of people on the internet who have concluded that if a woman has sex with multiple men, it leads to a loosening of the vagina, right? So these are people who have theory crafted their way into this. They think about it a lot and they discuss a lot and they kind of discover this kind of truism, which they all believe because it's logically correct, that sex with a lot of men leads to loose vaginas. And it's kind of like if you stop and think about it for a second, right? If you use any actual data to examine this, you'll discover that it's absolute BS. So the first question is, how does the vagina know if it's multiple penises or one penis, like being inserted over and over and over again? How does a monogamous relationship with lots of sexual intercourse not lead to a loosening of the vagina? And there's even more simple data that we can kind of look at, which is like, if I take really big bites of stuff, right? If I eat lots of different food like hot dogs and hamburgers and burritos and I'm taking big bites of things, it's not like my mouth gets all like loose and like stuff is leaking out. Like it's absolutely absurd. That's not actually how the elasticity of human body parts work at all. And so what are we kind of taking away from this? What we should really understand is that IQ or thinking cannot be a substitute for other things. That just thinking about stuff doesn't necessarily improve our performance in various areas. And we kind of understand this from situations like social anxiety. So if you look at it from a more clinical perspective, people with social anxiety will overthink, right? So when they enter social situations, they'll think about something, they'll think about it again, they'll think about it ahead of time, they'll think about it, afterwards. And even while they're there, they're so absorbed in their thoughts that not only does the thinking not help, the thinking actually hurts. It actually negatively improves performance. And you can understand this really well with a very simple example. So if you walk, do you think about walking? And if you ever try to walk while thinking about walking, like if you actually think about, okay, now I'm going to move this foot, and now I'm going to pick up this foot, and now I'm going to contract this muscle, and then I'm going to relax this muscle, and I'm going to lift my toes here, the more that you think about walking, the actually harder it becomes. And so this is the big problem with people who are overthinkers, is that we use thought as a substitute for learning. If we really look at the optimal way in which the mind solves problems, it's not actually with theory crafting, it's with learning and experience. And so if you're someone who's in a social anxiety kind of situation, or you have social anxiety, one of the treatments of social anxiety is to actually give this person data. I'm not talking about doing research about reading about theories of social anxiety on the internet. What I'm saying is that if you actually want to perform well in life, what you need to do is give your brain data, give it experience that it can actually learn from and adapt to. And if you sort of think a little bit about, okay, when does my brain perform optimally? It's not when I theory craft my way all the way to the moon. It's actually when I give my brain data sets. And we sort of know this from like playing games. Like you can theory craft as much as you want to, but 1,000 hours of theory crafting is not a substitute for 1,000 hours of gameplay, right? And this is kind of what we see in social anxiety, is that when people are sort of stuck in their own heads, one of the best treatments for it is some amount of exposure therapy, some amount of actually getting out there and experiencing different kinds of things. And when we experience these sorts of things, it activates other parts of our brain. So we'll sort of activate our empathy circuitry, we'll activate our learning circuitry. And if you kind of think about challenges that you face, the more experience you get with them, the easier they become. And that's not because you've thought your way to success. It's actually because you're utilizing all of these other parts of the brain. And here's the real tragedy of people who overthink, is that the more that you think, the more that the other parts of your brain become rusty. And this is especially true of kids with high IQ, because early on, what do we learn if we've got high IQ? We learn that there's one tool which can work really, really well for all kinds of different things. And the more that we start relying on our IQ, the more that we start relying on our thought process, the more atrophied other parts of our brain become. And so if you're struggling with overthinking and you're kind of wondering, okay, how do I think my way to a solution? The first thing that you need to understand is that you can't really think your way to a solution. And not only can you not necessarily think your way to a solution, that thinking may actually impede your chances of success. That the more that you try to think your way to a solution, the worse the solution is going to be, or the worse your actual performance is going to be. And how do you fix this problem? You actually just need to give your brain data. You need to give it the opportunity to learn. And so I'm going to leave y'all with a little bit of wisdom from the realm of Go. So Go is an ancient board game, also applies to things like chess, which is that if you want to be good at Go, what you need to do is lose your first 100 games as fast as you can. Because all the people who are learning Go sort of figured out that, okay, there's no substitute for actually playing the game. And so if you're struggling with a particular problem that you're overthinking, I know it sounds kind of scary, but probably what you need to do is learn instead of think. Give your brain data. And this is what's so crippling and paralyzing, is that when we think about, okay, how do I learn? We think that that process of learning is going to be incredibly painful. How do I get this person to agree to come to my birthday party? How do I get this person to like me? And so we think about this over and over and over again, but we can't ever come to a real solution. Instead, if you really want to learn how to socialize with someone and how to be accepted, the real solution is that you try something, right? You don't sit at home and think about it. You try something and you kind of acknowledge that this may not work out. But on the upside, the next time around that I meet someone, I will have more data and I will actually get better at this. And so just to summarize, if you even think about, how do you want to defeat a particular boss in a video game, the solution is not endless theory crafting. And y'all may have even seen arguments with like noobs on the internet who are low MMR and will theory craft their way into arguments with people who are way better than them at the game. And the thing is that you can argue against this noob on the internet, and you can be way better than them, but no amount of intellectual masturbation is going to ever convince them. What's the only way that they are going to learn? By actually doing something. So if you're crippled with overthinking, acknowledge that some kind of attempt is going to be anxiety provoking. Maybe breathe into it a little bit. Check out some of the YouTube videos that we have on meditation. Check out Dr. K's Guide to Anxiety and things like that. And really kind of acknowledge your fear and then try to actually learn instead of solve the problem.